So I always like to ask screenwriters who had that kind of success, how did the town treat you? What was the experience of being in the Final Destination hurricane, if you will?
Well, the funny thing is, I missed the hurricane because I was in New York. So I worked out of the New York office of New Line.
Hmm.
So I wasn't in LA where kind of all the, the hurricane-like action happens. So I was aware of how well it did, but I was in a different world.
Hmm.
And so I stayed at New Line because I just love the company so much. I'm just one of those people that, creatures of habit that gets very comfortable. I actually stayed at New Line until I sold the story for the sequel in 2000. And then finally my bosses were like, and everybody at New Line was like, "We love you to death, Jeffrey, but you sold two movies now. It's time
It's
to
it's time to
go
move.
out and do it for real."
Go out into the
Um,
world, Jeffrey. It's okay. Like they were
it's
pushing
okay.
you out of the nest.
Out of the nest. And but I was happy in New York, so I was going to stay in New York, but unfortunately, 9/11 happened, and I lived in Battery Park City, which is not far from the World Trade Center. So
Right.
once that happened, I decided to move out to LA. So typically when something like that happens, even when you sell a project, you kind of, you know, looking back, you kind of, you move to LA immediately, you milk that movie as much as you can till it comes out, and if it's a hit, you're out here. But I kind of missed all of that stuff. So by the time I got out here, it was funny because my agent, I got an agent, and he pretty much had to introduce me to the town because, James Wong and Glenn Morgan, who, co-wrote the movie and also directed it, they were out here in the hurricane. So
Hmm.
people didn't really know who I was until I actually got out here. And then they read my script and they're like, "Oh," I'm like, "Well, my name's all over the poster." But they don't, it's a town where if you're not sitting in a room with somebody, they don't actually go and look at a movie poster in the credits.
Out
Like
of
they just kind of go by what
yeah, out of sight, out of mind,
out
basically.
of sight, out of mind. So I missed the craziness of the hurricane, which I think was probably a good thing um, for me just as a person, because I think if I'd have got out here, I may have got sucked into like just a world of craziness that I wasn't prepared for. I got sober like 15 years ago, so I think if and mine was my vice was drinking, and it was just wasn't anything like super crazy. It was just kind of
Hmm.
more like sitting at home being being a
Sure.
sad drunk um, and
Right.
not being happy. So I think if I'd have been out here in that celebratory party kind of scene,
It wouldn't have been
especially,
healthy.
it would have been very unhealthy for me. So I think it was probably God looking out for me in that way. But it's funny now, kind of as the years go by, though, seeing how much of an impact the movie has had. Like when I hear somebody say this is a Final Destination moment, like
Oh yeah.
even when I'm not around, like they don't know that I'm involved with it at all. I'll just be out in public and somebody be like, "Oh, it's like Final Destination," and it's like, holy shit! Like this is like part of the culture now. Like
Oh, it's in the
it's
it's in the zeitgeist of
yeah,
yeah. It's definitely transcended. Like I mean, I'd argue kind of like a Freddy or a Jason or a Chucky or a Michael, but in
yeah,
its own very unique space. I mean, you have a Final Destination is a very unique niche within the horror genre because there is no killer.
yeah,
Visual killer. It's a very a very very unique and that has more than one movie. It has five
yeah,
movies. So
yeah.
that it's in itself, and I guess they kept being successful because they kept making them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's just as somebody who's been a horror fan my whole life, it's been very gratifying. But it's also a dragon that you're chasing. You find yourself chasing that dragon. Where somebody's like, "Well, why don't you bring us something like Final Destination again?"
Uh,
And I'm like, "Well, here's this idea," and they're like, "Oh, that's too much like Final Destination." Well, that was not enough like Final Destination,
so that is
and it's
something
like,
that's real because a lot of filmmakers and screenwriters don't realize that. But when you're a hit in town for something, that's the box you get put into, and you a lot of times have to fight your way out of that box. I know for a fact that Wes Craven, one of the greatest horror directors of all time, I knew his personal assistant. He was his personal assistant for many years, and he was dying to get out of. He wanted to do something different. He'd been doing
yeah,
horror for such a long time, and that movie, Music of the Heart, which was called 500
yeah,
Violins. The only reason he got that was because they wanted Scream 2. He's like, well, if you want me to do Scream 2, Harvey, give me the budget to make
yeah.
to make this. And that's how he got it. But I felt that he was, from what I understood, he was frustrated that he was only able to do horror. I know he wanted to venture out as an artist. And that happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, since I love horror, I don't mind being in that box as far as writing goes. But yeah, the idea that it's like, we need you to bring us something like
Final Destination,
that unique thing that you created. But then we were very concerned about it because it was unique until it became a hit. It's just a hard place to be in. But, the good thing is I find myself like branching out a little bit. Like right now I'm working on 2 animated series for Netflix. Mm-hmm. And they're kid animated series. And one of them has some creepy dark fairy tale elements. And the other one's like a spinoff of Usagi Yojimbo, the Japanese comic book.
Sure.
So that's like samurai rabbits, and it's so much fun to do it. So I'm finding myself finally branching out a little bit, but I always will come back to genre. Like I love the genre so much that.
Well, if you love it, you love it. But you also want to break out from. Look, I don't want to write another Final Destination. I did that. Let's move on.
Let's do something else.
Now, were you involved with the sequels? I know you were involved with the second sequel. Were you involved with the other sequels at all?
Not physically involved. I mean, I'm very good friends with the producer, Craig Perry. So, he'll call me up and a lot of times and bounce ideas off of me and let me know what's going on. So I definitely kind of know what's going on with the franchise. And it's actually been fun to see other people kind of come in and put their mark on the brand. I mean, the first one, it's always been this almost incestuous circle with the first 4. It's like, I worked on the first one and the second one. James Wong and Glenn Morgan worked on the first one and the third one. Eric Bress and J. Michael Gruber worked on the second one, and then Eric Bress did the fourth one, and then we brought in somebody new for the fifth one, and it was I love the fifth one, but it's just fun to see like other people kind of come in and take that concept and put their spin on it.
Right. I'm imagining what the George Lucas feels like with what they've been doing with Mandalorian and all the other cool films and stuff that they're doing with his baby that he had put out so many years ago.
Yeah.
Huh?
I think it all depends probably on personalities. Like if I'm not sure, like, because I know some people get very protective and precious of their work, but I think that's part of working at a studio that helped me kind of separate my ego from a lot of that stuff, because I realize like, once you write a movie and somebody else buys it, you're kind of handing it over to other people. So you just hope to create a good enough relationship with those people that you can have some say in how they execute it. But again, it's a quality problem to have if you have other people doing sequels to your stuff. So I definitely don't complain about.